Mom sacrificed everything after Dad died, but now she's sick, and it's all because of his secrets. It was a crisp autumn evening when the phone call came. I was 10 years old, playing with my toys in the living room, not knowing that my world was about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. I still remember the sound of my mom's voice cracking as she answered the phone, her face slowly draining of color. She tried to keep it together, but I could tell something was wrong. I didn't fully understand at the time, but my dad, the man who had always been my hero, was gone. The accident took him away from us in the blink of an eye, leaving a hole that nothing could ever fill. The next few months were a blur. My mom did her best to hide her pain from me, but I could see it in her eyes. She was trying to hold everything together, but how could she? How could she carry the weight of the world, all while raising me alone, trying to figure out how we would survive without the man who was supposed to be there to support us? But my mom, she was strong. She was always strong. In the months that followed, everything changed. The warmth of our home started to fade, replaced by a cold, hard reality. My mom, who had once been the glue that held our family together, was now facing a battle I couldn't fully comprehend. With my dad gone, she had to step into roles she never imagined for herself. She started working multiple jobs, anything to keep the lights on, to make sure I had food on the table. Some nights, she'd leave before I woke up, and I'd fall asleep waiting for her to come home, her tired footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice when she called me on her breaks, trying to sound upbeat for my sake. But I knew that behind every "I'm fine, sweetheart," was a woman breaking inside. There were nights when she didn't even have the strength to cook dinner, and I'd have to heat up something simple for the two of us. She would smile, always smile, as if it was all okay. But I knew it wasn't. My mom was giving everything she had for me, and I couldn't help but feel guilty. At 10, I felt like I should be doing more to help, but all I could do was try to be strong for her, even though I could see the weight of the world slowly crushing her. As the years passed, things didn't get easier. In fact, they got harder. I was older now, in high school, but the weight of it all still weighed heavily on my mom. She never asked for help, never complained. She just kept going, pushing herself further and further. She had to, because there was no one else. I remember one winter when it snowed heavily for weeks straight. My mom would wake up at 4 a.m., shovel the driveway, and then head out to her first job. She worked as a cashier at a local grocery store, and after that, she'd clean offices at night. There was barely a moment to breathe. I would wake up and hear her soft coughing from the other room, but she would brush it off like it was nothing. It wasn't until one particularly brutal morning that I noticed something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before: defeat. I was getting ready for school when she came into the kitchen, her usual pep and energy gone. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and swollen, but she tried to smile. "You need anything before I go?" she asked, like it was a normal day. I shook my head, but as I looked at her, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She was always so strong, but now she seemed so small. I didn't know it then, but I would later find out that this was the beginning of something much worse. She kept pushing through the pain, though. She kept sacrificing, because that's what a mother does, right? She gave everything she had, and still, she kept going, day after day, as if she could somehow carry it all on her own. She never told me how much she was suffering. How could she? She didn't want me to know how much it was breaking her. But little did I know, her body was giving out. Slowly, silently. It had been 2 years since my father passed away. It felt like a lifetime, but at the same time, the ache of his absence had never quite faded. My mom had done her best to carry on, but I could always see the weight of his loss hanging over her. She had fought to keep everything together, juggling multiple jobs, hiding her pain, and raising me alone. But it was clear, even to a child, that she was tired in ways that went beyond just physical exhaustion. We hadn't visited my father's grave since his funeral. The day of his death was still fresh in my mind, the cold air, the empty stairs, and the way everything around us seemed to lose its color. My mom hadn't wanted to go to the cemetery. It was just too hard for her. But today, something had changed. She told me, almost as if she had been thinking about it for a long time, that we were going to visit his grave. I think it's time, she said quietly. I didn't ask why now. There had been a distance between us and his memory, and maybe visiting his grave was a way of trying to reconnect with the man I had known. The man who had been larger than life, always so full of energy and purpose. I still couldn't understand why he had been taken from us so suddenly. It was a question that would always haunt me. We drove out to the cemetery in silence. The trees were starting to lose their leaves, and the sky was overcast, one of those gray days that made everything feel a little heavier. The cemetery itself was peaceful, almost serene, with rows of headstones stretching out before us like forgotten stories, each marker telling the tale of someone's life, someone's love, someone's loss. We parked by the familiar plot, the one where my father's name was etched in stone, a name that still didn't feel real to me. I could see my mom's hands trembling as she opened the door, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there for a moment, staring at the gravestone, and I could feel the weight of her grief. I used to bring him lunch here, she said softly, her voice breaking through the silence. He'd always laugh and say how strange it was to eat by a grave. But we used to talk, like it was just another day, just another ordinary moment. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. My mom's voice was trembling, as if the weight of 2 years' worth of unshed tears was finally catching up to her. We stood there together for a while, neither of us saying anything, just allowing the moment to settle over us. But then, as if the universe had other plans, I saw him. A man, standing just a few feet away by the edge of the gravesite. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and his face was obscured by the shadow of the overcast sky. At first I thought he was just another visitor, someone coming to pay their respects, but there was something about him that felt off. It wasn't the way he looked, no, it was the way he looked at us. His eyes were sharp, piercing, like he knew something that we didn't. And as I stared at him, a chill ran down my spine. My mom noticed him, too. She stiffened, her body suddenly rigid, and her face went pale, like she had seen a ghost. The man took a step forward, his gaze never leaving us. And then, in a voice so calm, so eerily collected, he spoke. You're here to visit him, aren't you? I looked at my mom, confused. Who was this guy? Why was he speaking to us like this? She didn't answer, but her eyes were wide now, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. The man took another step closer, his face slowly emerging from the shadow of his jacket, revealing features that I didn't recognize but still felt vaguely familiar. I knew your husband, the man continued, his voice low and almost conspiratorial. I knew him well. My mom's face went white. I had never seen her look so terrified. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I stood frozen, trying to understand what was happening. Who was this man, and why was he talking like he knew my father? And why did it feel like the air around us had suddenly grown thick and suffocating? The man seemed to take pleasure in our discomfort, watching us both as though he were savoring the moment. I don't think you know the full story, he said, his tone growing darker. You think you knew your husband, but he was involved in things that you wouldn't believe. You deserve to know the truth about the man you've been mourning all this time. The man you thought you knew. My mom finally spoke, her voice shaky but firm. Who are you? What are you talking about? The man stepped closer, and I instinctively moved to stand in front of my mom, though I was more afraid of him than anything else. I'm someone who tried to protect your family from the mess he left behind, the man said, his eyes narrowing. Your husband was in debt, deep in debt to some very dangerous people. People who didn't care who he was, or who you were, as long as they got their money. He was hiding it from you, from all of us, right up until the end. The world around me seemed to freeze in place. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could see my mom's hands trembling at her sides. She looked like she was about to collapse, but she held herself together, clinging to the last shred of composure. I don't believe you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My husband wasn't a criminal. He wasn't involved in anything like that. The man's eyes softened for a moment, and for a second, I thought he might back off, might apologize for scaring us. But then his face hardened again, like someone who had been carrying a secret for too long, and couldn't keep it hidden any longer. I didn't want to tell you this, he said. But it's too late now. He was mixed up in a web of lies and danger. And when he died, those people came looking for you. They're still out there, and they won't stop until they get what they're owed. I felt like the ground was slipping away beneath me. My father, the man who had been my hero, my protector, was not who I thought he was. He had been hiding a side of his life that was filled with secrets, secrets that had the potential to destroy us all. My mom's knees buckled, and I caught her just in time before she collapsed to the ground. She was shaking, her face pale, her eyes wide in disbelief. What do we do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The man stepped back, his face filled with regret. "There's nothing you can do now. You'll need to be careful. They'll come for you, just like they came for him." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run away from this man, from this nightmare, but I stood frozen, unable to move. The truth, this horrible truth, was now hanging over us like a storm cloud that we couldn't outrun. The man turned and began to walk away, leaving us standing there, at my father's grave, unsure of what had just happened, and even more unsure of what would come next. Everything had changed. The man walked away slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet cemetery, but his words lingered in the air like a thick fog. I wanted to run after him, demand answers, to make sense of what he had just said. But my legs felt like they were made of stone, and my mind was spinning, trying to process everything that had just been dropped on us. The man didn't look back as he disappeared down a row of graves, blending into the shadows like someone who had no place in the world, someone who was hiding something more dangerous than we could ever imagine. And as I stood there, holding my mom up, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives had just been completely turned upside down. But what struck me the most was the way he spoke. His words weren't just vague warnings or empty threats. They were detailed. They were grounded in something concrete. Something real. There was a part of me, the part that had grown up trusting my father without question, that refused to believe him. My father, my hero, couldn't have been involved in anything like that. But as I looked at the gravestone in front of me, the name carved into it, my father's name, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this man knew more than he was letting on. My father had secrets, deep ones, ones that my mom and I had never even scratched the surface of. I could hear my mom sobbing softly beside me, her body trembling, but I couldn't offer any comfort. I was lost in a storm of confusion, anger, and disbelief. The man had said my father was in debt, dangerous debt. That he owed people money, people who didn't care about him, about us, as long as they got what they wanted. But who were these people? Who was this man? What was my father involved in? I looked back down the row of graves, my mind racing, and that's when I saw it. The man was still there, standing at the far edge of the cemetery, watching us. The way he stood, so still and unwavering, was unsettling, almost as if he were waiting for us to come to him. I didn't want to go back to him. I didn't want to hear anything else. But something inside me told me that the only way to get answers was to confront this man, this stranger who seemed to know more about my father than I ever could. "I'm going to talk to him," I said, my voice trembling, but there was a determination in it that I hadn't felt before. My mom didn't stop me, though I could see the fear in her eyes. She was too stunned to even speak. I walked toward the man, my feet dragging, my heart pounding in my chest. With every step I took, the tension in the air seemed to grow thicker, like the earth itself was holding its breath. When I reached him, he didn't turn around. He didn't need to. I knew he had been waiting for me, just like he had been waiting for my mom. "I need to know everything," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling in my mind. "What are you talking about? What kind of debt are you talking about?" The man turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me feel as if he could see straight through me. Your father was involved in a lot of things that no one should ever get involved in," he said. "But not just that. He was a part of something bigger, something dangerous. It wasn't just money. It was power. Influence. And once he got too deep, there was no way out." I swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising panic. "Who are you?" I asked. "Why are you telling me this?" "I'm someone who's been on the edges of your father's life for a long time," the man replied, his voice gravelly, as if the weight of his words had been heavy on him for years. "I was part of his business dealings. I helped him out when things got tough. But he made some enemies. Big enemies. The kind of enemies that don't let things go. And when he died, they came after me too, looking for their share. I was having trouble keeping up." Business dealings? Enemies? My father, the man who had worked hard every day to provide for us, to build a life for us, was involved in something like this? "Tell me what happened," I said, my voice desperate. "What kind of business?" The man sighed, looking down at the ground as if he were seeing the past unfold before his eyes. "It started small. Just investments. But your father had big ideas. Too big, maybe. He wanted to expand, to make something of himself, something more than what he had. So he got involved with the wrong people. People who promised him big returns, who promised him power and influence. But it was all a trap." I could feel my chest tightening as the man spoke, my mind racing with images of my father, his face filled with determination and ambition. But this wasn't the man I had known. This wasn't the father who had worked hard and provided for us. This man was telling me something entirely different. "What kind of trap?" I asked, even though I was afraid of the answer. "Loans, mostly," the man continued, his voice darkening. "Money that wasn't really money. They wanted your father to take risks, to borrow more than he could ever pay back. And at first it worked. Your father was making money, building connections, doing deals. But then the debts started piling up. The interest rates skyrocketed. And he couldn't get out. The people he owed were not the kind of people you can walk away from. They weren't patient. They were dangerous." My mind was reeling. This didn't sound like my father at all. He wasn't a gambler. He wasn't a risk-taker. He was practical. He was grounded. Or so I thought. "What happened next?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "The money kept coming in, but it was never enough to cover the debt. Your father made deals with people who didn't care about his reputation, his family, or his future. They were just interested in one thing, getting their money back. And when he couldn't pay, they started to come after him. They started to threaten him. To pressure him into doing things he didn't want to do." I took a step back, my mind overwhelmed with the implications of everything this man was telling me. My father had been tangled up in something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. "What kind of things?" I asked, my voice shaky. The man hesitated, clearly reluctant to share more. But I could see the pain in his eyes, the regret. He knew that by telling me all of this, he was opening a door that could never be closed again. "Illegal activities," he said finally. "Fraud, money laundering. He had to work with people who weren't exactly operating within the law. And the deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. But your father, he was in too deep. He couldn't get out. And he kept it all from you. From your mother. He thought he could protect you by keeping it hidden. But in the end, it wasn't just the money they were after." "Then what were they after?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "The influence," the man replied, his voice barely a whisper now. "Your father got involved with some powerful people. People who could make things happen. And when he died, they saw it as an opportunity. They saw your family as a liability, as a loose end. That's why they're still out there." I was standing there, stunned, trying to absorb everything he had just told me. My father, my dad, had been living a double life, one that had been hidden from us. And now that he was gone, those shadows were chasing us too. "I don't know who else to trust," the man said, his voice low, as if the weight of everything he had shared was finally sinking in. But if you want to survive, you need to stay out of their way. They won't stop until they get what they want. They never do. With that, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the cemetery. I stood there, frozen, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. Everything I had known, everything I had believed about my father, had been turned on its head in a matter of minutes. And as I looked back at my father's grave, the name etched into the stone, I realized that the man I had known, the man who had been my hero, was nothing like I thought. The truth was more complicated, more dangerous. And I didn't know how to process any of it. After the man disappeared into the distance, leaving nothing but the echo of his words hanging in the air, I stood there alone for a long while, unable to move, unable to think. My mind was spinning in circles, trying to piece together a version of my father that I could comprehend, but every image I had of him, every memory of him as the strong, reliable man who had always been there for us, was shattered by the words of a stranger. My father had been hiding so much from us. And the worst part was, I had no idea how deep it all went. I walked back to my mom, who was still standing by my father's grave, her body tense and rigid. She hadn't cried yet. She hadn't said anything at all. But I could see the pain in her eyes, the same pain I felt, and the weight of everything she had been silently carrying for years. The weight of a life she had been living in the shadow of secrets. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to tell her what I had just learned. So I didn't. I just stood next to her, not saying a word, but silently offering the only thing I could, my presence. "Mom," I finally whispered, my voice hoarse. "We need to go." She nodded, still looking down at the grave, as if lost in thought. I helped her into the car, both of us quiet, our minds full of things we didn't know how to process. The world outside seemed unreal, like we were living in some kind of haze. When we got home, it was clear that the weight of everything was beginning to take its toll on my mom. She hadn't been herself lately, and I had noticed that she seemed more tired, more run down than ever before. But today, after the shock of the cemetery and the things we had learned about my father's past, her exhaustion seemed to take on a different quality. Something was wrong. I could see it in the way she moved, the way she held herself. There was something deeper than just fatigue. That night, as I helped her prepare dinner, she suddenly doubled over in pain. A sharp gasp left her lips, and for the first time, I saw the exhaustion in her face wasn't just emotional, it was physical. "Mom?" I asked, my voice trembling as I rushed to her side. "I'm fine," she said quickly, but her voice was shaky, and she wasn't convincing anyone. "I'm just a little tired, that's all." I wanted to argue, but something in her expression made me hesitate. She didn't want me to worry. She never wanted me to worry. She had always been the pillar of strength in our family, the one who carried the weight of everything, even when it felt impossible. But this time, I couldn't ignore it. I knew something was wrong. "We should go to the hospital," I insisted, the words rushing out of me before I could stop them. "You're not okay, Mom. You need to see a doctor." She looked at me for a moment, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, a brief crack in the armor she had worn so well for so long. But then, just as quickly, the mask returned. She stood up straight, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm not going to the hospital," she said firmly. "It's just a little pain. I'm fine." But I could see the truth in her eyes. She wasn't fine. She was far from fine. And I knew that this wasn't just about her pride or stubbornness. There was something deeper going on, something she hadn't told me, and I was terrified that it might be too late to fix it. "Mom, please," I begged. "You don't have to do everything on your own. You're not alone. We can figure this out together." She sighed, her shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. She turned her back to me for a moment, her hand gripping the counter tightly. "I know, sweetie. I know. But I can't afford to stop. Not now. Not when we're so close. I need to keep going. I need to finish what we started. We can't afford to fall behind now." I didn't understand what she meant at first, but then I realized she was talking about the debt. The overwhelming weight of the bills, the loans, the mountain of responsibilities she had shouldered for so long. My father's debts, the ones that had remained hidden, were still hanging over us, threatening to destroy everything we had worked for. And my mom, despite her own suffering, was determined to pay it all off. To finish what my father had started, even if it meant sacrificing her own health and well-being. She had been working herself into the ground for years, pushing herself harder than anyone could imagine, all so we could survive. All so we could hold on to something resembling a life after everything fell apart. And now, even when she was clearly struggling, she refused to stop. She couldn't. Not until she had paid everything off and we were finally free of the burden. I watched her, feeling helpless and devastated, as she tried to keep it together, as she always did. But this time, I could see it in her eyes. She was fading. I couldn't let her do this alone anymore. "I'll work too," I said, my voice steady now, though my heart was breaking. "I'll help with the bills, I'll do whatever it takes. You don't have to do this by yourself." But my mom shook her head, a tired smile crossing her face. "No. I've got this, sweetheart. You don't need to worry about me. I've worked hard to get us this far. I'm not going to stop now." The next morning, I tried to talk her into seeing a doctor again, but she refused. She insisted that she felt better and was just tired, but it was clear she was lying. I could see it in the way she struggled to get out of bed, the way she winced when she moved. She had been pushing herself for so long, and now it was taking its toll on her body. But still, she refused to stop. She went to work that day, despite everything. She went to her job at the grocery store, then to her second job cleaning offices, all while I stayed home, worrying about her. I tried to call her a few times, but she didn't answer. By the time she got home that evening, she was pale and breathing heavily. She collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling from exhaustion. But even then, she didn't say a word about what had happened. She didn't admit that something was wrong. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I'll rest and be better tomorrow." But I knew the truth. She wasn't fine. She was running on fumes, pushing herself beyond the breaking point, and I didn't know how much longer she could keep going. Still, she refused to stop. She refused to give in. My mom, the woman who had carried this family on her shoulders for so long, wasn't about to lie down now, no matter how much she needed to. The following days were a blur of more work, more stress, and more tension. The weight of the debt was crushing us, but my mom kept pushing forward, determined to pay it all off. She didn't talk about the pain anymore, didn't let anyone see how much she was suffering. But I knew that something had to give, that this kind of strength could only hold out for so long. But my mom, stubborn as ever, wouldn't let it. Not until she had paid off every last cent. Not until she had done everything she could for us. Not until she had finished the fight that my father had started, and that I had no idea we were even in. And so, despite everything, she kept going. She kept working, kept fighting, kept giving everything she had, until the day when something finally broke. It didn't take long for things to spiral out of control after that day at the cemetery. Despite my mom's insistence that she was fine, her health began to deteriorate faster than I could keep up with. I knew something was wrong, but every time I tried to confront her about it, she brushed it off, telling me she was just tired or overworked. But the truth was undeniable. One evening I came home from work to find her collapsed on the couch, her breathing shallow and labored. Her face, once so full of life, now appeared drained and gray. Fear gripped me, and I immediately called for an ambulance. My mom didn't want to go, of course she didn't, but when she saw the panic in my eyes she agreed. At the hospital, the doctors ran tests, and the waiting felt like it would never end. Hours passed in a blur, and by the time the doctor finally called us in, I could barely hold it together. The sterile white walls, the quiet hum of machines, it all felt like a dream, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The doctor's words shattered everything. "I'm afraid it's very bad," he said, looking at us both with pity. Your mother is very ill. She has advanced organ failure. Her liver, her kidneys, her heart, none of them are functioning properly anymore. I'm afraid she only has 2 to 3 days left to live. There's nothing we can do. The damage is too severe. The world felt like it was crashing down on me in that moment. 2 to 3 days? It couldn't be real. How could this be happening? How could my mom, the woman who had always been so strong, so invincible in my eyes, be slipping away so quickly? My heart ached with a pain I had never known. I looked at her lying in that sterile hospital bed, her face pale and her body weak, and I felt utterly helpless. My mom, the woman who had fought every single day to keep us afloat, was going to leave me alone in this cruel world. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. She didn't say much after that. She was too weak, too exhausted, but when I sat beside her that night, holding her hand as she lay there, she spoke one last time. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more for you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're so strong. You'll make it. I know you will." I kissed her forehead, tears streaming down my face, and all I could say was, "I love you, Mom. You've done more than enough. You've done more than anyone could ever ask for." A few days later, my mom passed away in her sleep, peaceful but too soon. My world, the only world I had ever known, crumbled in an instant. The woman who had raised me, who had fought for us, who had been my everything, was gone. And I was left behind to pick up the pieces. Alone. The funeral was a blur, an overwhelming rush of people offering their condolences, but none of it made sense to me. Nothing mattered anymore. I had lost my father, and now I had lost my mother. I couldn't imagine how I would move forward. But as the days passed, something strange happened, something that would change everything, but in a way I never could have anticipated. It was a Wednesday when I saw him again. The man from the cemetery, the one who had spoken about my father's debts, the one who had shared things about my dad's past that I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I had thought I'd never see him again. I had hoped that our brief encounter would remain just that, brief, a shadow in the past. But life doesn't always give you what you want, does it? I was sitting at my desk at work, my mind still fogged with grief, when I saw him walking through the front door. I froze for a moment, my heart racing. He looked the same, dark jacket, tired eyes, the same air of mystery and danger surrounding him. My stomach twisted as I watched him approach. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaky, unsure of why he was here or what he wanted from me now. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stood there for a moment, looking at me with those piercing eyes that seemed to see right through me. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to me, and without saying a word, turned and walked out of the office. I watched him leave, my heart pounding in my chest. What was this? What did he want with me now? I opened the envelope with trembling hands, not knowing what I would find inside. There, written on a piece of plain white paper, were my father's words.
My dearest child, I know that by the time you read this, things may have already gone terribly wrong. I am writing this now in the hopes that, should something happen to me, you will understand why I did the things I did and why I kept certain truths hidden from you for so long. You deserve to know the truth. The man who has just given you this letter, he is one of the few people who knows everything about my past. He has seen the things I've done, the deals I've made. And now, he's here to make sure you know what's been left behind. The truth is, I didn't want you to ever know about the debts, the danger, the things I got tangled in. I thought I could protect you from it all, but I was wrong. The money I owe, the people I owe it to, they are not the kind of people you can escape from. But there is something I did for you, something I want you to have. It won't change what's happened, but it may help you find some peace. There's a substantial amount of money in the bank, money I set aside to ensure that you would be taken care of. You've always been my priority, my reason for everything. Use it wisely. And above all, remember that I did this for you, for your future. I hope that one day, you can forgive me for the things I didn't tell you, for the secrets I kept. I only wanted to protect you. And I hope you can live a life that is better than the one I created for us. Take care of yourself, and know that you were always loved. With all my love. Your father.
I sat there, staring at the letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. My father, my hero, had left me a legacy of money, something that would ensure I wouldn't have to struggle like my mom and I had. But it didn't matter. No amount of money could bring her back. No amount of money could fix the devastation that had overtaken my life. I looked at the note again, trying to process everything that had been said. My father's words were filled with regret, filled with love, but also with the weight of all the decisions he had made that had led to this point. The truth about his debts, his involvement with dangerous people, it all made sense now. It explained the man at the cemetery, the warning, the secrecy. But it didn't make it any easier to accept. Tears filled my eyes as I held the letter, the final piece of the puzzle that had been my father's life. And as I thought about everything he had done, about the sacrifices he had made, even the ones I had never known about, I realized that this wasn't just about money. This was about the legacy of a man who had tried to protect me, even if it meant lying, even if it meant carrying secrets that would one day be too much to bear. But the man, the one who had handed me the letter, was gone now. And all I was left with was the haunting memory of my parents, the choices they had made, and the broken pieces of a life that could never be put back together. And now I had to figure out how to live, how to move forward, with everything that had been given to me, and everything that had been taken away.